At 85 years old, I began to notice something that scared me more than any physical pain. I was forgetting names of people I had known for decades. I forgot important appointments, and even what I had gone to the kitchen to get. I would stand there in silence, asking myself, what was I about to do? And the worst part, I was starting to forget words. Simple words, words I used every day. At first, I laughed it off. I told myself, it must be tiredness, a bad day. But then it started happening more and more often. A confusion here, a blank spot there. Until one day, I couldn't remember the name of my youngest granddaughter. She looked at me, hugged me, and I just smiled, pretending. Inside, I felt a knot. I thought, is this the beginning of the end? Is this what they call dementia? I felt fear, frustration, shame, and above all, a sense of losing myself little by little. My children began to notice small mistakes. They suggested I talk to a doctor. I didn't want to. I wasn't ready to receive a label, a word that would change how they saw me, or how I saw myself. That was when I met up with an old friend. We met for coffee, like we used to many years ago. He listened closely, and calmly, he told me something simple. Start eating this every day. It's a fruit. Just try it for a week. It seemed silly to me. A fruit. How was that going to change something so serious? But I had nothing to lose by trying. I did it. And to my surprise, after a few days, something started to change. Today I want to tell you exactly which fruit it was, what I felt during those 7 days, and how you can incorporate it into your diet if you're starting to notice the same lapses. Because what seemed like the beginning of the end turned out to be the start of a new opportunity. And before I continue, I want to ask you a question. Where are you watching me from? I'd love to get to know you. Tell me in the comments. At first it was small things, tiny, things anyone could forget on any given day. What was I looking for here? Where did I leave my glasses? Did I already take my pills or not? I thought they were normal lapses, a distraction, a busy mind, maybe a bad day. But little by little, those small forgettings started sneaking into important moments. I started repeating stories without realizing it, forgetting what I had just been told, mixing up names, even of people very close to me. One day my son asked me if I remembered the appointment with the doctor, and I had no idea what he was talking about. I swore he had never told me, but then he checked his phone. He had sent me a message, and we had even talked on the phone about it. I didn't remember a single word. That was when I began to worry seriously. It wasn't just a distraction. It wasn't just a tired mind. It was something deeper, something that made me feel clumsy, insecure, as if I were losing parts of myself. Going out also became different. Sometimes I doubted whether I'd locked the door properly, or whether I'd left the stove on. I would go back again and again to check. And although everything was fine, the doubt chased me like a shadow. A part of me no longer trusted my own mind. The worst part wasn't forgetting. The worst part was the feeling that I couldn't control it. Feeling that my head was going down a road I hadn't chosen, and that I didn't know how to slow it down. It's like being inside a car that starts to lose control, and you're in the driver's seat, but without brakes. People told me it was normal at my age, that it happens to all of us. And yes, it's true. Many older adults forget things, but what's common isn't always what's normal. We shouldn't accept as inevitable something that hurts us, that limits us, that makes us feel less alive. I wasn't afraid of forgetting an appointment. I was afraid of forgetting who I was. It's a silent fear that many older people carry inside. They don't say it, they don't tell it, because it's embarrassing, because it brings sadness, because they don't want to worry others. But that fear is there, in every confusion, in every word that won't come, in every silence that lasts longer than it should. And that fear is what made me look for answers, because even if they told me it was part of growing old, I didn't want to give up. When the forgetfulness started to become more obvious, my family were the first to notice. At first with patience, with affection, but over time their tone changed. They went from understanding smiles to worried looks, from innocent jokes to advice that sounded a little too much like orders. One evening during dinner, my daughter looked at me with that expression that mixes affection with discomfort, and she said, "Dad, that isn't normal." She said it after I told them a story I had already told 3 times that same week. I didn't do it on purpose. I didn't even remember. But her eyes, more than her voice, made me feel something I hadn't felt before, that they were worried about me, and not in a good way. My son, always more direct, was even clearer. "Dad, maybe you should start writing everything down, or talk to a doctor, just to be sure." He meant well, I know. I don't judge him. But inside, I felt small, vulnerable, as if they no longer trusted me, as if my word no longer carried the same weight. From then on, every small mistake of mine became a reason for observation. If I lost my keys, "Dad, see? This isn't normal." If I forgot to turn off the light, "Dad, do you realize?" If I repeated a story, they just looked at each other. They didn't say it out loud, but they thought it, and I felt it. That frustrated me deeply, because inside, I was still the same. I didn't feel sick, just confused. But every time I made a mistake, they treated me differently, as if I were a child, an adult in body, but childlike in decisions. They suggested I shouldn't drive at night, that I shouldn't go out to shop alone, that I should leave the bills in someone else's hands. Suddenly my rights seemed negotiable, my freedoms questionable. I didn't like feeling watched. It made me tense, as if I had to constantly prove that I was still lucid, that I was still capable, that I was still me. I even started hiding my mistakes, not saying anything when I forgot something, to avoid that tone, that worry disguised as affection. I started pretending, filling the gaps in my memory with generic phrases. And that was the most painful thing, having to hide instead of feeling accompanied. I know my children love me. I know they want the best for me. But in trying to take care of me, they made me feel incapable. And that feeling hurts more than any forgetfulness, because nobody wants to have their trust taken away, and much less their dignity. After constant insistence from my children, I agreed to make a doctor's appointment. I didn't do it out of conviction. I did it for them, so they could be at ease, to show them, and maybe also to convince myself, that it wasn't anything serious, that I was just a little distracted, that it was normal at my age. The visit was brief. The doctor, a young man with a good attitude, asked me simple questions. What day was it? What year are we in? What did I have for breakfast this morning? I answered everything without a problem, almost with pride. Then, a few short tests. He asked me to memorize a list of words, to count backward from 70 by 7s, to draw a clock showing 11:10. Little tests that, if I'm honest, made me feel as if I were taking an exam to prove I still deserve my place in the world. I finished the test. The doctor smiled, kind, but without saying much. He wrote something on his sheet. Then he looked at me and said, "For now, there's nothing conclusive, but it's important to stay under observation." Pause. And then, "It could be the beginning of something more serious." That sentence stayed with me. It didn't matter what he said before, or what he said after. Just those words, the beginning of something more serious. He didn't tell me I had something, but he didn't tell me I didn't either. And in that space of uncertainty, my mind overflowed. I began to imagine the worst. I saw myself losing control of my thoughts, forgetting my children's faces, not recognizing my house, getting lost on the street. I saw myself in a chair, in silence, with a vacant stare, while others decide for me. That night I slept little. I struggled to close my eyes. I was afraid. afraid of closing my eyes and that, when I opened them, something inside me would no longer be there. That some memory, some word, some piece of my story would have vanished forever. During the following days, I became quieter, more observant of myself. I analyzed myself constantly. Is what I just did normal? Would I have forgotten this before? Every lapse became an alarm. Every slip, a sign. I started living with the anxiety of always being on the verge of crossing an invisible threshold, as if I were walking a tightrope, waiting for the moment to fall. I didn't tell anyone, because I didn't want to worry them, because I didn't want to be labeled, because I was afraid that if I said it out loud, it would become real. And in the middle of that anguish, I started looking for solutions, but not in medications or aggressive treatments. I didn't want to medicalize myself. I wanted to find something natural, something that would help me, even a little, to feel that I had some control. That was when I remembered that conversation with my friend. His advice, so simple, almost ridiculous at the time. Try this fruit, every day, just that. And even if it sounded naive, at that moment, it was the only thing that gave me hope. A few days after that doctor's visit, I got a call from an old friend, Ernest. I've known him since we were teenagers. We hadn't spoken for months. I was glad to hear him. His voice was the same, steady, unhurried, with that serenity he always had even in difficult moments. We agreed to meet for coffee the next day. When he arrived, I noticed something different. Not physically, not something you could see from the outside. But there was a kind of mental agility in him, a clarity in the conversation that caught my attention. He spoke precisely, remembered dates, names, details from the past, without hesitating. I told him I noticed he was doing very well, and he, smiling, replied, "I'm going to tell you a secret. I thought he would tell me about some new supplement, or a method of brain exercises. But no. What he said was much simpler. I started eating a fruit every morning, a small cup, nothing more." I looked at him skeptically. "A fruit?" "Yes," he said. "Blueberries." Blueberries. The word seemed soft, almost innocent. I wasn't expecting that. He explained that, without great expectations, he had started eating them every day with his breakfast. At first, because he had read something about their benefits for memory. He didn't believe in it much, but he bought them anyway. And over time, something changed. "I'm not going to lie to you," he said. "It's not like from one day to the next you have the memory of a 20-year-old. But I started to remember things more easily. I felt that words came out faster. I felt less foggy, less slow. And best of all, I felt more confident. I listened carefully. Inside, I doubted. I thought maybe it was suggestion, or simple coincidence. But there was something in the way he told it, in his calm, that made me curious. I had nothing to lose. It wasn't a pill. It wasn't an expensive therapy. Just a fruit. Natural. Simple. Affordable. "Try it," he said. "Just 7 days. 1 cup a day. Then tell me." That same afternoon, I went to the supermarket. I bought a box of fresh blueberries. I had never eaten them regularly. They were small, dark, with a flavor between sweet and tart. I looked at them like someone observing something unknown, almost with distrust. That night, I prepared my breakfast for the next day. Oatmeal with a portion of blueberries. I thought, it can't do any harm. And the next day, I began what I called my little experiment. I didn't tell anyone. I wanted to do it quietly, to observe myself, to see if there was any change, however small. I wasn't expecting miracles, just something, a sign that I could still do something for myself. That's how those 7 days began. 7 days in which, without realizing it, I would start to recover something more than memory. On the first day, I sat down to breakfast with a cup of warm oatmeal and a handful of fresh blueberries on top. They looked good. In fact, they even seemed elegant to me, a small luxury I normally didn't allow myself. I looked at them for a second before taking the first bite, like someone who doubts that something so simple can make any real difference. I ate them without expectations, without rituals or magical thinking, just as a gesture toward myself, an attempt, a personal experiment. Then I poured my coffee, read the newspaper, and went on with the day like any other. But that first day, I didn't feel anything different at all. I forgot where I'd left my notebook. I asked my daughter again about the time of an appointment she had already repeated to me twice. I got the change wrong at a store. The usual. What had been happening for weeks. The second day was similar. I repeated breakfast, fresh blueberries, this time with plain yogurt. I told myself, be consistent, don't judge so soon. But during the day I had lapses again. I forgot I had a pending call. I left a pot on the stove a little longer than I should have. Nothing serious, but frustrating. My son, seeing me confused, gave me a look I knew well. That mix of tenderness and concern, as if he were assessing whether it was time to step in. I didn't tell him about the blueberries. It was my little secret mission, my silent challenge. On the third day, I admit I felt a kind of disappointment. I wondered if all of this was just another illusion, something you want to believe because you're desperate. I began to think that maybe Ernest had just had a good week, a streak of clarity we all have sometimes, and had decided to give the credit to a fruit out of a need to believe in something. But even with that doubt, I didn't stop. I would get up, prepare my breakfast, add the blueberries, and eat them in silence. Alone, without saying a word. I wasn't expecting drastic changes. I just hoped not to keep getting worse. I clung to the idea that maybe the changes weren't immediate, but subtle. Like when you plant a seed and for days you see nothing, but under the soil something begins to grow. That's what I thought, or at least that's what I wanted to think. Because even though there were no visible improvements, there was something different. Something inside me that said, you're doing something for yourself, and that, however small, was already important. It made me feel less like a victim and more like a protagonist, not completely lost, but searching. That's how the first 3 days passed, slow, confusing, without miracles, but also with something new, the decision to keep going, even without certainties. Because sometimes, when the world becomes uncertain, the only thing we can do is take one more step. The fourth day began like the previous ones. Simple breakfast, same ritual, oatmeal, blueberries, coffee. But that morning something happened that, though minimal, made me think. I was about to go out to do some shopping, and without looking at the list I had written the night before, I remembered everything. 3 things: bread, soap, and fruit. All 3, just as I had written them. It wasn't a big deal, but in the previous days, even with the list in my pocket, I usually forgot to check it. I took it as a coincidence, but I noted the observation mentally. I thought, interesting, and went on with the day. On the 5th day, something clearer happened. I was walking in the park when I ran into a neighbor whose name I always forget. Always. Every time I see her, I have to greet her with a simple "good morning" to avoid it being obvious. But that time, without knowing how, her name came on its own. Clara. I said, "Good morning, Clara." She smiled, surprised. "How nice that you remembered my name," she said. "Not everyone does." I was surprised too. It was as if someone had removed a veil from my memory, as if something had become unstuck. I went back home with a different feeling, a kind of mental lightness. I wouldn't know how to describe it. It wasn't euphoria, it wasn't a revelation, it was more like clarity. That night, for the first time in a long while, I took out an old notebook I had kept in a drawer. I wrote on the first page, Day 5, and below, I wrote down everything I had remembered effortlessly. Words, names, small appointments. I did it without scientific intentions, just for me, to be able to look back and know whether this was real or just suggestion. On the 6th day, I confirmed something. I felt more focused, as if my head were less foggy. Not that everything disappeared. I still had small lapses, but the feeling of losing myself was no longer so strong. I could follow a conversation without losing the thread. I remembered what I had said minutes before. I felt more confident when speaking, less dependent on notes, less nervous. I wrote it in the notebook too. I feel clearer. I don't know if it's suggestion, but I notice it. I notice myself. By the 7th day, I had already established a routine. I would wake up, prepare my breakfast, include the blueberries without thinking, like someone taking a medicine, but without side effects. Then I would sit down to write how I felt, what I remembered, what I didn't. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't magic, but it was different. That day, I remembered a phone number without looking it up in the address book. I called a cousin I hadn't seen in months. We talked for a long time. I told him I felt good. I didn't go into details, but inside, I knew something was changing. Something small, yes, but significant. The notebook kept filling up, with observations, with emotions, with small victories. I didn't feel cured. I didn't feel like before, but I felt on my way, as if, little by little, I were cleaning a fogged-up window, and on the other side, I was seeing life clearly again. 7 days, just 7. Not to turn back time, but to regain a bit of control. And that, at my 85 years, was a gift. After noticing those small changes, I began to wonder whether it was all just a coincidence, or whether there was really something in that small, dark fruit that was making the difference. I decided to do a little research, to read, to ask, and what I found surprised me. It turns out blueberries aren't just a tasty fruit. They are, according to many studies, one of the food's richest in antioxidants that exist. And this, although it sounds like a technical word, is very important. Antioxidants help fight the cellular damage that comes with age. And yes, that includes the brain. As the years pass, our neurons, those tiny cells that form the network of our memory, our ideas, our thoughts, begin to deteriorate. Part of that deterioration is due to so-called oxidative stress, a kind of internal aging that happens naturally. And that's where blueberries play an interesting role. Studies have shown that blueberries are loaded with flavonoids. Flavonoids are natural compounds that, among other things, help improve communication between neurons, promote blood flow in the brain, and protect against inflammation, which can be one of the silent enemies of memory. One of the best-known studies was carried out by the University of Cincinnati, where it was observed that older adults who consumed blueberry juice daily for several weeks showed significant improvements in their short-term memory and learning ability. That is, they didn't become younger, but they did become more lucid. Another study, published in the journal Annals of Neurology, followed thousands of older people over years. The researchers found that those who consumed blueberries frequently had much slower cognitive decline than those who didn't. The reason? Everything seems to point to those small compounds that act as a kind of shield for the brain. There are even studies suggesting that blueberries can improve the function of the hippocampus, an area of the brain that has a lot to do with memory and spatial orientation. And most importantly, these effects were observed especially in older people, which is great news for those of us who have already passed 70, 80, or even 90. Now, this isn't magic. Eating blueberries isn't going to erase all memory problems in one stroke. It won't turn you into a walking encyclopedia. It isn't a miracle cure or an empty promise, but it can make a difference. A small difference, perhaps, but one that, added to other healthy decisions, can help you maintain mental clarity for longer. And to feel, as I felt, that there are still simple tools within our reach. Sometimes the most powerful things don't come in the form of a pill, but in a handful of small fruits that nature has always offered us. After that trial week, I decided to incorporate blueberries into my life more consistently, not as an obligation or a fad, but as a small daily act of care, something I could do for myself every morning without complications or extreme effort. And the best part is that they're very easy to include in your diet. You don't need to be a cooking expert or prepare complicated recipes, just a bit of intention and consistency. The simplest thing you can do is what I did. Add a handful of blueberries to breakfast. If you usually eat oatmeal, yogurt, or whole grain cereals, just sprinkle blueberries on top. They add a special touch, a sweet, natural note that, besides being delicious, brings real benefits. Another very practical way is in smoothies. A glass of plant milk or regular milk, half a banana, a handful of blueberries, and if you like, 1 teaspoon of oats or chia seeds. Everything into the blender. In less than a minute, you have a smoothie full of energy, fiber, antioxidants, and flavor. Ideal for mid-morning or as an afternoon snack. You can also eat them on their own, as a small snack between meals. Just a handful in the afternoon, when you sit down to read or watch television. Or even add them to a fruit salad. You don't need large amounts. Experts usually recommend 1 serving a day. That's equivalent, more or less, to 1 small cup. Not more, not less. The important thing isn't to overdo it, but to be consistent. A little every day, like someone slowly watering a plant, until one day you realize it's blooming. Now, many people have asked me what to do if they can't find fresh blueberries. And it's a good question, because they aren't always in season, and sometimes they can be expensive or hard to find, especially in certain countries. The good news is that there are perfectly valid alternatives. Frozen blueberries retain most of their nutrients. You can buy them in bags, keep them in the freezer, and use them whenever you need. Just take them out a little before eating, or put them directly into a smoothie or a hot preparation. Another option is dried blueberries, as long as they have no added sugar. Many brands sell them sweetened, which isn't ideal. Look for the most natural ones you can find. You can add them to nut mixes, homemade breads, or eat them as an occasional snack. The important thing is to find the way that best fits your routine, your budget, and your tastes. There's no need to follow a strict diet or change your entire life. A small daily gesture is enough, because sometimes the deepest change begins with something as simple as a cup of fruit in the morning. And so, without realizing it, you build a clearer mind and a steadier future. Blueberries were my starting point, but I soon discovered they weren't alone. There are other fruits, and also some habits, that can help a lot to keep our memory active and our brain healthier, even as time passes. Among the most recommended fruits are grapes, especially the dark ones. Like blueberries, they're rich in antioxidants and contain resveratrol, a natural compound that has been studied for its potential benefits for brain and cardiovascular health. You can eat them fresh or include them in a fruit salad. Another great ally is the strawberry. This fruit is not only delicious, but it also provides flavonoids and vitamin C. Both help reduce inflammation in the body, including the brain, and combat cognitive decline. Some studies have even noted that frequent strawberry consumption is associated with slower brain aging. And although they aren't fruits, I can't fail to mention walnuts. A handful a day can be a great gesture for mental well-being. They're full of healthy fats, vitamin E, and omega-3, nutrients that support communication between neurons and help protect the brain from the wear and tear of the years. You can add them to breakfast, eat them as a snack, or include them in salads. But beyond food, there are other factors that directly influence memory. One of the most important is rest. Sleeping well isn't a luxury, it's a necessity. While we sleep, the brain processes and organizes the day's memories. If sleep is light, interrupted, or scarce, the mind can't do that job well. That's why having regular hours, avoiding screens before bedtime, and creating a calm nighttime environment can make a big difference. Another valuable recommendation: reading. Reading every day, even for a few minutes, is like exercising the brain. It helps maintain concentration, expand vocabulary, and reinforce memory. It doesn't matter if it's a novel, a magazine, or a history book. What matters is that it connects you, stimulates you, makes you think. And if you have time, playing can also be good mental training. Simple games such as crosswords, word searches, memory games, or even some digital games designed for older adults can help keep the mind active. Plus, they're fun and often can be shared with others, which also boosts emotional well-being. None of this is a magic solution. No food or activity by itself will stop the passage of time. But when you add small actions, day after day, the cumulative effect can be powerful. Sometimes, big changes don't come from drastic decisions, but from steady, simple, sustainable habits. That's the real key: consistency. Making your self-care a routine, not an exception. Eating well, resting, reading, staying active. Everything you do for yourself today is an investment in your lucidity tomorrow. And as I discovered with blueberries, it's never too late to start. Today, after several weeks since that first breakfast with blueberries, I can say honestly, my memory didn't go back to what it was when I was 40. I don't have a perfect mind, nor did I become a genius overnight. I still have my moments of forgetfulness, my lapses, my slower days. That's part of life, and I'm not ashamed of it. But there was a change, a real change, one I can feel and live. Today, I remember things that used to slip away. Names, dates, appointments. I can hold a conversation without losing the thread. I can do my shopping without a written list. I went out alone again without fear of forgetting why I had gone out. I regained confidence in my own mind, and that, for someone who came to fear getting lost inside his own body, is much more than an improvement. It's a liberation. But the most important thing wasn't only what I remembered, but what I recovered inside. I recovered confidence. That feeling that I can still make decisions, I can still learn, I can still take care of myself. I got up from that sense of resignation that so many older adults feel when we begin to notice that the body and mind don't respond like before. I stopped feeling adrift. I stopped believing that all I had left was to wait. I took the helm again. Yes, it was the fruit. But it was also the attitude. It was the gesture of trying, of not giving up, of saying, I'm not going to sit idly by while my mind fades. Because it wasn't just about blueberries. It was about deciding to take care of myself, about trusting that there are still paths to explore, habits to build, small solutions that, added together, can give us back parts of ourselves. And that's why I'm here, telling my story. Not to tell you this is a magic cure. It isn't. But to tell you that it's never too late to try something new. It's never too late to take care of yourself. It's never too late to choose to keep going. Sometimes the biggest change doesn't happen in the mind, but in the heart. And in my case, that change began with a spoonful of fruit, a bit of faith, and the decision not to give up. If you're going through the same thing, if you've ever felt lost, slow, or discouraged, I want you to know this. You're not alone. And there is always, always something you can try. It may not be a definitive solution, but if it helps you recover a little bit of yourself, it's already worth it. When it all began, I felt fear. Not about forgetting a name or a date, but about forgetting who I am. I thought that losing memory was the first step toward losing myself, and for a moment, I even came to believe there was no way back. But then, in the middle of doubt, I made a small decision. A cup of blueberries, a simple gesture, an almost insignificant step. What came after wasn't a miraculous transformation, nor a change from one day to the next. It was something more real, more human. I began to notice improvements, small, subtle, but important ones. I remembered more. I felt clearer, more present, more myself. And that was enough to understand that sometimes great battles are won with small acts, but consistent ones. Today I want to tell you something very clearly. You can do it too. It doesn't matter if you're 60, 70, 80 or more. It doesn't matter if you've already started to notice that your memory isn't the same. What matters is that you don't settle. Don't accept as inevitable what you can still improve. It's not about turning back time. It's about moving forward with dignity, about caring for what remains, about protecting your mind, your story, your essence, because losing a memory is painful. but losing hope is much worse. So today I encourage you to take that first step. Maybe it's blueberries, maybe it's sleeping better, reading a bit more, or simply stopping telling yourself that it's already too late. It isn't. As long as you're here, there's still something you can do.
And now, I want to hear you.
Have you also noticed that your memory has changed over the years? Tell me in the comments. I want to read you. I want to know where you're watching me from and how many years old you are. This channel isn't just mine. It belongs to all of us. And if you know someone who needs to hear this, someone who is starting to forget, who feels frustrated or who has lost hope, share this video with him or her. Maybe, as happened to me, you'll help them take that first step.
Thank you for being here.
See you in the next video.